Thank you. Thank you so very much. I wish I could be with you in person. This is new for many of us. At the University of Framingham State, where I teach, I'm also teaching online, and I would have preferred to be in class to see people's reactions to the dilemmas that I pose in my ethics class, but that's not possible right now, and God knows when this will become available. So tonight, my topic is great people generate great legends. That's my thesis, and I'd like to explore three individuals as I develop my thesis. One would be Moses. The other one would be Alexander the Great. And finally, I will end with King Solomon. So after I finish each one, during my talk, you can put your questions in chat. And after I'm done with a personality, I'll look at the chat and then see who has any question, and I'll try to answer them. Are we all set? We're ready to start? I guess we're ready to start. Throughout history, people simply told stories orally, father to son, mother to daughter, father to daughter, mother to son. Grandparents especially told stories. And these stories developed into legends. Now, what is a legend? A legend is a traditional story, sometimes popularly regarded as historical, but not authenticated. And putting it differently, it's a non-historical or unverifiable story handed down by tradition from earlier times and popularly accepted as historical. The word legend comes from the Latin meaning legenda, and it's used in reference to written accounts of a saint's life. What's the difference between a legend and a myth? A legend is supposed to have some basis in historical facts and tends to mention real people and real events, whereas myth is storytelling that was never based on fact. They are often used to teach a lesson. Myths deal with meaning, not facts. Examples, according to a Greek myth, Prometheus stole the fire from Zeus, the chief god, and gave it to humans so that they could keep themselves warm. Obviously, this is not historical, that's a myth. A modern myth is that of a cat crossing the road in front of you, and that brings you bad luck. Now, if you believe in it, good luck to you. In the Bible, the creation of the world or the story of Jonah are classic myths because they're not real history. We're not dealing with history. Whereas, on the other hand, the stories about King David are legends. And my theory is that great people of the past eventually developed legends about themselves, and we know very, very little about the real facts. So that's something that I want to put on the table. So if anybody has any question with my definition or approach, here is your opportunity to ask me your first question. It's a difference between legend and myth. And as example, tonight, I'm going to start, and let me start with Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was a Macedonian ruler in Greece who established the largest empire in the ancient world. He was also the subject of many, many legends. According to sources, he was born in the city of Pella, Macedonia, in the year 356 BCE, to King Philip II and Queen Olympias, Macedonia. As Macedonia was a small kingdom on the northeastern part of Greece. Alexander the Great was a student of Aristotle, the Greek philosopher. After his father's death, he took command of the Greek army and conquered much of the civilized world of his own time, from going all the way from India to Egypt. It was the largest kingdom ever known until then. He built and founded the city of Alexandria in Egypt, or the city was named after him because he built it. He died, regrettably, he died at the age of 33 in the year 323 BCE. Look how much he has accomplished in such a short time. Now that we have some facts about his life, let's deal with some of the legends that developed around him. In fact, there was an ancient book called Alexander Romance that talks about these legends in more detailed fashion. According to legend, he was the son of Zeus, the god. He was God's son. When he was in Gordium, that's in Turkey, in the year 333 BCE, he undid the Gordian knot. This was a knot tied by Gordius, king of Phrygia, to be united only by the future ruler of Asia. In the Quran, Alexander the Great is portrayed as the one called two-horned one, like the Egyptian god Amun-Ra, that's in Surah 18. Rams were symbol of virility in the past. In the Talmud, in the rabbinic text, there are a number of references to Alexander the Great because he conquered the Middle East, including ancient Palestine, ancient Israel. Simon, according to the Talmud, Simon the Just, the high priest, and other sages came to the gates of Jerusalem to meet Alexander as he entered the city on his famous horse called Bucephalus. When Alexander, on the other hand, the king, saw Simon, the high priest, he dismounted from his horse, bowed down to the high priest out of respect for him. Now, in reality, that is unlikely to happen. unlikely to happen. According to rabbinic material, Alexander the Great treated the Jews well, and because of that, Jews agreed to name every child born the following year as Alexander. You see how a small detail is aggrandized and made into a huge thing, where in reality probably it never happened to begin with. So that is the legend of Alexander, a king about whom so much is being said in the literature. Any questions about Alexander the Great? I don't see any questions. All right. We'll move now to Moses. What do we really know about Moses of the Hebrew Bible? In reality, we know very little. And what we know is not reliable. Again, we're dealing with a fascinating legend about one of the greatest leaders of the past. The Bible portrays him as the great liberator from the Egyptian bondage. As you probably remember, the Israelites entered Egypt. They lived there a number of years. We don't know how many. There are different sources that say different things about that. According to one, 400 years. According to another, only 4 generations, and we don't know exactly what that means. And he freed the Israelites and took them out of Egypt. And according to the Bible, he received the 10 Commandments. Again, there are all kinds of problems with that, and became the leaders of the Israelites during the desert period. He most likely lived. It's difficult to create somebody like Moses and say he never lived. I believe he lived, but his life generated various legends for which we have no answer. Let me identify some of the problems for you, what we have in the Hebrew Bible. First question is, who was his father-in-law? We know that he had 2 wives. 2 wives, and then he had an unnamed Cushite woman. But the text contains 3 different names for his father-in-law. In one place, he's called Jethro. In another place, he's called Hobab. And another place, he's called Reuel. Now, if you have 2 father-in-laws, you should have only 2 names, not 3. So we don't know who is Jethro, who is Hobab, and who is Reuel. That's problem number 1. 2, where did he get the Decalogue from God? According to one source in Exodus 31, he got the Decalogue at the Mount Sinai. But according to the book of Deuteronomy, he got the 10 Commandments at a mountain called Horeb. Is Horeb and Sinai the same thing? We don't know. Besides, the 2 sets of the 10 Commandments differ considerably with regard to many of the commandments. So, which one did he get? Did he get the one in the book of Exodus 20? Did he get the one in Deuteronomy 20, Deuteronomy 5? So we don't know. We don't know. In Exodus, the revelation took place during the first few months in the book of Exodus, whereas in Deuteronomy, the revelation took place at the end of 40 years. Now, one thing you should know about numbers in the Bible, they are not reliable. When the Bible says 40 years, it simply means a long time. It doesn't mean 30 years, 39 plus 1. So no number in the Bible can be relied on. Their approximation means a long time. That's the way they spoke in biblical times. 40 years, 49 means a long time. Remember the story about his childhood, his infancy. He was put on in a basket, and the Pharaoh's daughter discovers the baby and all that. That story comes not only from the Bible, but comes from the Akkadian literature that was written centuries prior to the Hebrew Bible. It's exactly the same story. Exactly the same story, which means that there was a legend about a great leader being found in a basket, and then they applied this later on to Moses as well. Furthermore, we don't know if Moses was an Egyptian, if he was a Midianite, or he was a Levite. And the Bible mentions all three of them. Couldn't have been all of them. Another problem is about his name. What was the meaning of his name? In Hebrew, he is called Moshe, from the Hebrew meaning pulled out from the Nile. Josephus, the Jewish historian who lived in the 1st century, claims that the name comes from Mo, meaning water in Greek, and Eusis, meaning saved. That's a good guess. In reality, the name Moshe, Moses, comes from an Egyptian word that means to give birth. It means son of, which means we don't even know his real name. Because Moshe, coming from an Egyptian Mose, simply means son of. The legends continue about Moses. In the 3rd century, an Egyptian priest by name of Manetho claimed that Moses was an Egyptian priest, not an Israelite. A Greek historian, Strabo, who lived in the 1st century, claims that Moses was only a philosopher, nothing else. A Jewish historian of the 2nd century, a fellow by the name of Atrapanus, claims that Moses was the son of a king in Upper Egypt. Josephus, a Jewish historian of the 1st century, claims that he was a philosopher, he had a great mind, and he was tall and handsome. I wonder if he saw a picture of Moses somewhere. And Moses threw away the king's crown. To escape death, the king's daughter took him away. In the New Testament, Moses foretold the arrival of Jesus, according to Acts. In the Quran, Moses is mentioned 115 times. And there are a number of differences between the way he is described in the Bible and the way he is described in the Quran. Bottom line, I think Moses lived, but we know absolutely nothing about the historical facts that have to do with him. Is that bad? No. It simply means that he was a great leader who generated various legends around him. I see somebody put a question here. Are there any useful comparison between legends which are false and current misinformation? Oh, don't get me started on that. Certainly. We're dealing with legends. We're not dealing with facts right now, unfortunately. Any questions about Moses? All right. Let me deal now with King Solomon, another legendary figure of the past. There is no doubt that King Solomon had many accomplishments. He was the son of King David. By the way, he was the 10th son of the King David. He lived around the 11th century BCE. And he was the second son of Queen Bathsheba. He reigned how many years? He reigned 40 years. Again, as you can see, again, 40 years means he reigned a long time. Obviously, he represents the golden age of the United Kingdom when all the tribes were united. And he died, according to the Bible, at the age of 80. And 80 obviously is 40 times 2. He built the Temple of Jerusalem. And a number of books in the Bible are attributed to him. The Song of Songs is attributed to him. The book of Ecclesiastes is attributed to him, and that's impossible because the book of Ecclesiastes has some words that are very, very late in the biblical period. Even a 3rd century book entitled The Testament of Solomon was attributed to him, and there is no way that he could have written that either. It was during his reign, during the reign of his son, a fellow by the name of Rehoboam, that the kingdom split into 2, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. So he was not able to maintain, or his son was not able to maintain the kingdom united. Now, when you start to read the stories about King Solomon in the Hebrew Bible, you find things that are unbelievable. According to chapter 11 in the book of Kings, King Solomon had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines. This guy wouldn't even know wife number 30 from wife number 52. To claim that he had 700 wives is beyond anybody's imagination. Could never happen. He probably had many wives, but according to the Song of Songs, he had 60 queens and 80 concubines. So not even the Bible agrees with each other regarding how many wives and concubines he had. read chapter 11. You're going to have a very good time when you read that. The book of Proverbs also refers to a number of things that the Queen of Sheba asked, but that cannot be taken literally either. And when it comes to rabbinic texts, Solomon, we are told, was punished for his overbearing pride when he was impersonated, when he was by the demon king Ashmedai. All kinds of demons are associated with King Solomon. The Wisdom of Solomon has all kinds of stories about the king that cannot be taken literally. Then you have references to King Solomon in the Quran, where we are told that Solomon was taught by God the language of birds. He could speak the language of birds. And by the way, a similar story is told in another rabbinic text entitled Targum Sheni. It's a 4th century text. Who took it from whom, we really don't know what we have. So as you can see, there are all kinds of legends about King Solomon that cannot be verified and cannot be true. Somebody put a question saying, are legends harmful or undesirable? No, legends are not harmful as long as one realizes that these are legends and not historical facts. I have nothing against stories or legends or even myths, as long as we know that there's a major difference between an historical fact, legends, and myths on the other side. So, which brings me to the discussion of who wrote the Bible. If there are so many legends included in the text, who wrote them? According to the traditionalists, Moses wrote the 5 books of Moses, and others wrote the books that carry their name. That cannot be true. Biblical scholars already realize that the 5 books of Moses are not the 5 books by Moses, but they are 5 books dealing with Moses. They were written over a long period of time by 4 different sources that were eventually combined and put together. So when you read the text, and just keep that in mind, that's a text that is combined later on, probably put together in the 2nd century BCE, and not when Moses lived, who knows, in the 10th century or even 12th century BCE. Somebody has any question? Given your explanation that a number of details and numbers in the Bible are very approximate or perhaps even wrong, how and when should religion debate exact choice of words or choice of phrasing as a way to determine meaning? Religion often does. No, when I give a sermon from the pulpit, the way that I give a lecture right now, I say this is not history. These are legends. These are stories about great people of the past. So we take it with a grain of salt. We don't take them as literal. There is no way to assume the accuracy of biblical stories because we have no way to verify them. And there is very little outside of the Bible that can corroborate what we have in the Bible. Yes, the Israelites are mentioned in Canaanites' stories and other places, but when it comes to internal details, these are purely Israelite legends that were generated over a long, long period of time. Now, does it matter if Moses or King Solomon lived? I think it does, because great things are attributed to Moses, and it's perfectly all right. Don't say this was done by Moses, but you can say Moses would have approved this, or it's attributed to a great leader of the past, and I have no problem whatsoever dealing with that approach. So how do we read ancient texts? And my take is that ancient texts need to be read within the context of their own time. That's how people spoke in those days. They probably even took legends as historical facts, but we don't know that. But now, when we read ancient texts, we should be able to distinguish between what appears to be history, as long as we can verify it by using outside sources, and stories told in the Bible that are just simply stories that teach a lesson. So we need to read the Hebrew Bible for the values that it teaches, not for the history that it claims to provide. Now, let me take your questions now. I said a number of things that probably shocked many of you, or pleased many of you. I don't know. You're not in front of me, so I can't gauge your reaction by looking at the pictures on my monitor. Any questions? Any reaction? Yeah, somebody has a question? No. Boy, did I shut the discussion so fast. By the way, the same thing applies to many ancient, to other people mentioned in the Hebrew Bible too. So it's not, the same thing applies to the New Testament, and many things also apply to the Quran. These are old texts that are full of legends. It's perfectly all right, as long as we know the difference between history and legend. It's perfectly legitimate to read them for the values they share. Yeah, somebody's mentioning the Akkadians have a flood story. Absolutely. The story of Noah and the flood is taken directly from Akkadian sources. There was a long-standing story about an ancient flood that took place that almost destroyed civilization, and that comes from Akkadian sources. Akkadian was a language that was spoken in ancient Babylonia before the Israelites even emerged in the historical scene, and before that, they had the Sumerians who lived in the 3rd millennium, and they had a flood story as well. So there is a flood story circulating in the Middle East all the way from the Sumerians, 3rd millennium, all the way to the biblical Hebrew Bible text, which contains the story of the flood as well. Any other question? If not, my presentation ends here. I hope I did not shock you. I hope you will continue to read the Bible. I do that on a regular basis, but I know the difference between history and I know the difference between history and legend, and I read for the values and for the messages that teaches me every day. Let me see if there is another. Given that there is more and more information available to verify facts, will legends of relatively current leaders cease to exist? Well, probably, but I don't want to have to deal with modern situation because we have lots of legends, even in our own time. As long as we know the difference between truth and fantasy, we should keep that in mind. Well, good night, everyone. Stay well. Talk to you another time. Bye-bye.